Hey everybody, Kalani and my colleague Bill Matney here. We're at the 2016 American Music Therapy Association National Conference. And I just came from a session, and it was a great session. Two music therapists working in another country with children, basically refugees of war. Yeah. And it was really, really powerful, really touching. And they were talking about some of the modalities in which they were working. They had some singing, song recreation, some folk music from their country, helping the young men and women, recreate. They used instruments from their culture. They were actually able to purchase instruments and give to them. Many of them were percussion instruments. And they did use the term group drumming or drumming class, but they also mixed in the term drum circle. And this is very common in our profession.
Yeah.
We hear this word drum circle. And now you and I have talked about this, and we've gone through the process of creating a taxonomy of drumming experiences that explain the difference between the many types of group drumming. And I'll put a link to that below this video. But let's just talk for a minute about, why is it that we seem in the music therapy community to just kind of default to calling most forms of group drumming a drum circle.
Yeah.
Why is that?
There are probably at least a couple of reasons. I think one of them is people aren't really that familiar with the history of the drum circle.
Right.
And I hate to bounce it back to you. We can dialogue a little bit, but I want to defer to you a bit because you are more directly involved in understanding that history. I can speak to it somewhat peripherally. My understanding, at least, is largely in communities there were some drummers that would just get together and play. We also saw this at Grateful Dead concerts oftentimes. In some ways that was a little bit of a proliferation of the meme of the idea of the drum circle. But feel free to go from there.
Exactly. I think we saw people getting together to create spontaneous, casual, community-based music making, largely using drums, not exclusively, but largely using drums and percussion because they could carry it to the beach, or they could carry it to the park, or on the camping trip, or in the woods.
Right.
Where we see them at rainbow gatherings, Grateful Dead concerts, beaches, parks, and this still exists today. We have Venice Beach Drum Circle near me.
When I visited you that one time, we got to see one.
Yeah. We have got Griffith Park Drum Circle all over the U.S., and these have been going on for 50, 60 years, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure before that, but not in Africa. That's another thing that people say, that people have been doing drum circles in Africa or something. That's just simply not true.
They don't understand that term. Most other cultures don't use that phrase.
That's true. It's kind of a uniquely American term.
And rarely you might hear Native Americans use that phrase, but the question is whether or not it really originated there. I'm not sure.
It's an English word anyway, so of course it originated in our culture. Yeah. I think sometimes other cultures use it because we use it.
Right.
But the term drum circle is not a synonym for group drumming.
Right.
And just because you see people in a circle drumming doesn't mean it's a drum circle. And we've talked about what does it mean what is a drum circle? And the term drum circle really popped up, I think, in the mid 50s, maybe early 60s, as a way to describe a group of people who were meeting, out in a public area, usually, not exclusively. It could be in a facility or at a location, maybe somebody's backyard or somebody's house. But the idea was that they just get together, improvise music together. But the purpose was really to be in community.
Yeah.
All right. The ultimate goal was not musical. Nobody's really judging it. Right. It's not a lesson. You're not recreating culturally specific music. And this is really important. There was not somebody leading or even guiding.
Right.
It was completely a democratic, extemporaneous process.
Show up and go.
Show up and play.
Yeah.
And whatever happens, happens. And that's really the classic definition of a drum circle. And that's the definition that Arthur Hull, Mickey Hart,
exactly.
Some of the main figures would support and have defined it as. But what are some of the other reasons you feel like the term has been so prevalent within the music therapy community?
Well, so I'll use a bit of a kind of a parallel here. If I sneeze, then I might go around and look for something to wipe my nose, right? And some people will call that a tissue, which is kind of the more general word.
Generic.
Some people will call it a Kleenex.
Right.
So sometimes we have different words to describe things, but sometimes we just get used to a word because we're exposed to it so often, and it kind of reinforces the idea. We often hear about drum circles from drumming manufacturers who are thinking about group drumming, and they're proactive about that. And drum circles can be an absolutely wonderful thing. The question then becomes, is that what we're doing as clinicians?
Right.
And it's just a question that needs to be posed. It's not a matter of criticism or feeling that one thing is superior to another. It's just a matter of clarification as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Do we, another parallel to that might be, we have the word hootenanny, right?
Yes.
In our American culture.
Yeah.
Hootenanny is, in my understanding, similar, right? It's a community jam session. It's casual. It's done for community.
Yeah.
Now, and that's usually let's say that's from more of the bluegrass, folk music.
Right.
So the instruments you might see there might be guitar, bass, banjo, mandolin, maybe violin, fiddle.
Yes.
If you saw somebody playing guitar or fiddle or mandolin or banjo in a music therapy setting and singing songs, now would it be right to call that a hootenanny?
It's a great question.
Is that what you're doing?
Right. Are you doing the hootenanny?
Are you having a hootenanny?
Right.
Or are you doing music therapy?
Right.
Even though, so you're recreating songs, you're having this, and so that's kind of, to me, the same thing. Is you might see a drum circle, and then you might be improvising on drums in a circle in a music therapy setting. But does that label really work?
Right.
Or is there something
Or
that
is
would
there
be
a
more
better
appropriate?
label?
Yeah.
Our field, I don't know when the proliferation in terms of literature for the drum circle came out. Or when did Arthur finish his first book?
I think it was about 1996, 97.
96, 97, okay.
Yeah.
So we can go back, 1960s, 1950s, and we see at least the inception or the bubbling up of this idea of clinical improvisation. Certainly in the Nordhoff-Robbins literature, we very much see that proliferated in Bruch's work.
Yeah.
But even before that, we see bubblings of that idea coming up. Clinical improvisation is exclusive to music therapy.
Right.
It doesn't require a particular instrumentation, although there were tendencies at that time for it to be related to piano or guitar, more melodic instrumentation. Oftentimes at that time, clients were playing percussion as a part of the improvisatory process. But I don't think there's ever been a time when clinical improvisation really would not have or does not apply to music therapy work when one is using percussion and improvising for a particular therapeutic process and outcome.
Exactly. Yeah. If you were improvising on your guitar, or people were singing and improvising, that was clearly clinical improvisation. Or you're playing your piano, and people are playing other instruments, and you're all working together. That's improvisation in a clinical setting with clinical, clear techniques.
Yes.
That
codified
are
techniques.
Codified techniques that are specific to the profession. If just because you're using drums, do you label it a drum circle? And that's the question. And I say it might be a mistake to do that because it implies that the same relationships are there in your music therapy practice that would be in a drum circle. Which in a drum circle, it's do whatever you want. There's no leader. In a drum circle, even if there is a facilitator, which there doesn't have to be. Clearly the facilitator is not the therapist. It's not tasked. So it's a completely different set of relationships. Yeah. So maybe it's just been a term that people have heard, and they don't know that it actually is a specific thing. A drum circle, just like a hootenanny, is kind of a specific thing, and it may not be appropriate to use it in a music therapy context. It also sort of implies that if you say you're doing a drum circle in music therapy, it sort of implies that somebody who calls themselves a drum circle facilitator. And I don't feel the need personally to define myself as a drum circle facilitator any more than I define myself as a song facilitator. You know, we do songs. I might play ukulele. You know, I might play drums. We might all sing. I'm not a choir facilitator. You know, I don't think I have to redefine my role just according to the instrumentation. Right? I'm a music therapist. When I'm working in a group, I'm a music therapist. We're doing music therapy. We might be singing. We might be drumming. That doesn't redefine I don't need a new label for what I do. But I think, to finish my train of thought, if you say you're doing a drum circle and you're a music therapist, it kind of implies that a drum circle facilitator kind of does what you do.
Yeah.
And that can be really confusing for your participants and, more importantly, for the people who hire music therapists and the people who might hire a drum circle facilitator because they think that they do what you do. And I think that's something we all need to think about.
Mike Marcianetti has Mike Marcianetti is one of our colleagues in music therapy drumming, and he has this great way of describing, would you rather sit down and tell your administrator who's asking about your session, yeah, we did a drum circle and I cued some calls and responses and we had a really good time, or I conducted clinical improvisation and I used these particular techniques because I was looking for this outcome, and here are the ways that outcome manifested. There's a way to articulate clinical improvisation because it's indigenous to our literature, and to our literature, and the literature is rich and varied, that we're able to let an administrator know what we're doing, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and what the outcomes were.
Yeah.
So there may be some benefits to going that route.
Yeah, I think so. And I also, it just reminded me of something, and I think you told me this, that Remo Belli said about the drum circle.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You know, you want to say?
No, go for it. I don't know.
So we can
we'll
to this
see if
together.
We get to it.
So
it's been a while.
What I remember you saying is that Remo Belli showed up to a drum circle, and he said, "Well, I don't know if you're going to have any therapeutic experience with this, but I think there's one thing that I can say, and that I think you'll have fun."
Yes.
I think you'll have fun, and I think that really sums it up. Is that the drum circle is about having fun. And often it is, and I hope it is. If it's not, don't do it, because certainly don't want to be stressed out.
Right.
You want to have fun, and I think that is the goal of a drum circle.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily the goal in music therapy. We hope our clients enjoy themselves, but we're there to help them grow. We're there to help them meet their therapeutic goals. I mean, we are tracking so many things during a session. We're just not there to have fun.
Right.
And if you use those same terms and you mix them together, it can be really confusing to people. That, like, well, what are you doing in your music therapy? You're having a drum circle, really? Like the beach? Like I saw on the beach?
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I hope people look into clinical improvisation. The information's out there. The Bruscia book, Gardstrom, my book that you published called The Way of Music. Because those techniques actually predate the use of the term drum circle. Yeah. They're specific to music therapy. Yeah. Music therapists are the only people who use those techniques. They're powerful techniques. They're amazing. And so I feel like, music therapists can very much own this process and not have to look outside of the profession. You've talked about that. We don't need to look outside of the profession for drumming. There's plenty of drummers in the profession, present company, who can show people how to play drums. And there's plenty of people, even a lot of people. You mentioned some already, the Nora Robbins people, that can speak to and teach the clinical improvisation.
Yeah.
So just because it takes place on drums doesn't make it something else than clinical improvisation.
Yeah.
So if you guys, you can check the link below here. We'll give you guys the taxonomy of drumming experiences, so you can look into what are the many kinds of experiences you can have with drums and percussion. And so you can use those terms and pick the term that best fits what you're doing. Sometimes I do drum circles. I just did one recently for a corporate event.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's outside of my music therapy practice. So as a music therapist, and you sometimes facilitate drum circles too,
and I
right?
love it. I love it. It's just a different hat.
It's a different hat, yeah. It's a different job with different terms. So yeah, as a music therapist, I would assert too that as a music therapist, you don't even need different training. You can use your music therapy training to run an awesome drum circle. If you have clinical improvisation training and you know how to do things like grounding and you know, synchronizing and you know, intensification, and you can do all those things. That's another discussion. And I think you can do them without having to use a lot of conducting.
Do them through the music.
Through the music.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to take a separate training. I don't think you need to retitle your job. I think, you know, anybody can do a drum circle. A music teacher, a music therapist, a drummer, a professional musician, an amateur musician. Anybody can lead or help out with a drum circle. If you want to take trainings, that's okay. It's not going to hurt, but I don't think it's necessary. So check the links below this video and let us know how we can help you guys at musictherapydrumming.com. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Yeah.